dear President of the European Academy, Professor Klaus Meinzer, dear Honorary President of the Academy, Professor Felix Unger, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it's a very honor for me to be here and collaborate with Violeta in the duality of science and arts and science. It's a series of colloquia for the two coming semesters. And I'm very glad to see important figures, individuals that participate in this colloquia that bridge somehow the arts with science. It's an experiment that we do with Violeta, and I'm looking forward to learn more from this colloquia along with yourself. And if I may say, it is an honor for us, from Violeta and myself, to invite Professor Klaus Meinzer to make the introduction to the first colloquium of this series. Professor Meinzer.
Thank you very much. Dear members of the European Academy of Science, welcome to this really exciting series and experiment with lectures of Class 3 and Class 4. Natural sciences meet arts, and arts meet natural sciences. The initiative of the deans of both classes concerns the mission and vision of our European Academy, which is dedicated to sciences and arts. We all know, since C.P. Snow's claim that modern science, technology, and arts decay into different cultures with different languages, missing understanding due to increasing specialization in the sciences and segmentation of society. But actually, our European tradition started with unity of science and arts in antiquity, and Ioannis, with respect to you, in Greek antiquity. We remember Plato's idea of the logos, which unifies order and truth, harmony and beauty in the universe. The Pythagoreans, the students of Pythagoras, believe in common measures of celestial spheres in astronomy, geometric proportions in architecture, numbers of arithmetics, and harmony in music. In this tradition, unity of arts and sciences was still assumed in the Renaissance by the great artists and scientists such as Leonardo da Vinci, Albrecht Dürer, and Johannes Kepler. In modern times, universal unity and harmony in Europe broke down and split up in increasing specialization of sciences, decay of religion, segmentation of society, and individual subjectivity. The philosopher Immanuel Kant brought it to the point when he strictly distinguished between the categories of natural laws on the one side and the aesthetical judgment of subjective taste in modern times. At a first glance, modern paintings seem to be far away from imitation of nature. Modern music, far away from so-called natural harmony. But a more careful analysis reveals that in the beginning of the 20th century, abstract painting, for example, Picasso's Cubism, emerged exactly in the time when modern physics started to explore the quantum world with abstract mathematics. And in the same time, Schönberg's 12-tone music broke with traditional harmonies, but behind his series of tones, there are hidden, rigorous mathematical structures. Thus, there may be a hidden correlation between science and arts still in our century. Since antiquity, we believe that the human mind is distinguished by aesthetical intuition. Therefore, for me, as a mathematician, AI researcher, and philosopher, the question arises if robots with aesthetical intuition will be possible in future or not. Anyway, we still have and will have an inspiring lecture series across all classes of our academy. I thank the speakers and the organizing deans, Violeta, Dinescu, and Ioannis, Liritzis, for their engagement. All the best and have a great time. Thank you.
Wonderful words. Thank you very much. It is like bringing luck to our lecture series. Thank you very much. I would like now to present Professor Michael Hampe. A wonderful presentation. I don't have any words for him. He was already also present in the summer semester with a wonderful lecture. You shall discover the magic of the music and theater with Mr. Hampe. Thank you very much for coming. Please.
Violeta, sorry, can you say, we say a few words about our colleague, because some, of the participants may not know who is Michael Hampe.
Michael Hampe.
So if you allow me, it is Professor Hochschule für Musik Köln, Germany, guest professor of University of Vienna, Austria, Untitled College of Music, Tokyo, Japan, Yale University of Southern California, board member of IMA, European Music Theatre Academy, Vienna, opera director, Scala Mainland, Royal Opera London, and member of Class 3. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ioannis.
Thank you. Does opera have a future? Opera. Favola per musica, or drama per musica, was the name of this new art at its invention about 4 centuries ago in Florence. And this expresses very well what opera is meant to be. A story enacted by music, a plot expressed through music. Music is opera's principal means of expression, as is the playwright's text in a play, the rhythmically moving body in a ballet, the moving images in a film, hence the name movie. Opera music is thus dependent on the plot. It is music for a purpose. The difference between music and music for a purpose is often not clear, although it is easy to explain. Pa 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 in Beethoven's Fifth Symphony means and expresses pa 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 pa. It is absolute music, highly emotional, but abstract. The musical material from which Beethoven constructs the first movement of his symphony. Zu Hilfe, sonst bin ich verloren, der listigen Schlange zum Opfer erkoren. The introduction of Mozart's magic flute, with its hustling, chasing, pulsating music and the snake-like movement at the bass line, is something totally different. Here, the music has to depict and express very concrete things, namely the specific panic of this specific Prince Tamino in that specific extreme situation. The music is used for a purpose. Purists might even say abused. Music, the most abstract of arts, is merged with the most concrete, the dramatic art. The composer makes it sound as it looks in his imagination. The performer has to go the reverse way, making it look as it sounds. If both meet, rarely enough, the result can be opera in heaven. This uncertainty to distinguish between music and music for a purpose might be one reason that opera, unlike all other performing arts, has never developed a proper craft of its own during the 4 centuries of its existence. No canon of rules and techniques one must learn and master before practicing the art. There's no ballet without years of body training, no film without skillful handling of the camera. Japanese kabuki players practice for many years before they are even allowed to set a foot on stage, not to mention the traditional Chinese opera with its artistic and acrobatic miracles. Opera, though, has only developed such a technical canon for singing, but not for enacting music. And singing is not enacting. This lack of a craft has made opera vulnerable from its very beginning to all kinds of misunderstanding, nonsense, and abuse. That a donating nobleman had the rights in Handel's opera house to go on stage during the performance in order to have a close look at proceedings, or the prima donna, did not help the success of Handel's works. On the contrary, it contributed to Handel's bankruptcy. When the Jockey Club of the 19th century Paris ultimately demanded from Wagner that the ballet in his Tannhäuser should have to take place in the second act, because during the first act one was still at dinner, and during the third, the night was already scheduled with the fair ladies of the ballet. And when Wagner, defending his work, refused to abide by this demand, the Jockey Club made such a rabble-rousing noise at the opera house that further performances had to be cancelled. These are only 2 examples of the endless chroniques scandaleuses of opera throughout the centuries. And yet, the great works always rose like phoenix from the ashes out of such depth of maltreatment and degradation. During the last half-century, though, developments have taken place which threaten opera's very existence. A huge competition of new art forms and media has grown. Film, television, musical, DVD, internet, online gaming, and most recently streaming and artificial intelligence. Their refined production techniques, their visual power and special effects, and above all, their worldwide distribution and commercial potential makes opera look old and unattractive, especially for younger generations. Opera can no longer, as queen of the arts, welcome society in its palaces. On the contrary, the danger of abdication and exile is imminent. Further, to evolve as a living art form, opera would need to replenish its repertoire by a constant stream of new works as in former centuries. But that is not the case. A lot of important works have been created over the last century, but only a few of them have been accepted by the public to be included in the standard opera repertory. The reason is obvious. Since opera music has to depict concrete events, the audience needs to understand who wants what, from whom, and why. For that, it needs an understandable musical syntax, which too many of the new works do not offer. Therefore, the same roughly 50 old operas are played over and over again, which requires each staging of the same old work to be totally different from the preceding production, with the result of more pseudo-intellectual somersaults, arbitrary gimmicks, and in the end, sclerosis. Actually, my statement that there are not enough accepted new works is only partly correct. They do exist, musicals. From the numerous new musicals each season, some have attained the rank of classics. West Side Story, Porgy and Bess, Les Miserables, to name just a few. Opera, though, instead of incorporating them into its repertory by creating the right conditions for their performance, has driven musicals out of the house, along with operetta and the whole popular genre, and ultimately with the performer's craft. For in a musical, players cannot survive without craft, precise acting, stunning technique, and brilliant casting. Thus, a lively, popular music theater has firmly established itself, with the result that an average musical like Mr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde runs in a city like Cologne 500 times, and a much better musical, The Magic Flute by Mozart, only 20 times. That it has come to this is opera's own fault. Another important development has to be mentioned here: the globalization of opera and the worldwide introduction of the original language in performances. The main reason for this has not been an artistic one, but rather Pan-American Airlines. The possibility and resulting necessity for singers to perform a role in New York, the next week in Paris, and shortly afterwards in Vienna. This naturally required one definitive version for all places, and that could only be the one in the original language. Until then, operas had been mostly sung in the language of the audience. In Germany, Italian operas in German. In Italy, even Callas sang Kundry in Wagner's Parsifal in Italian. And in London, his master singers were performed in English. Artistically, there's a lot to be said in favor of the original version. Everybody on stage or in the pit feels at ease with the authority of the original, but not the audience. It did not understand anymore. It had to get used to a kind of exotic spectacle full of musical, visual, and other aesthetic sensations, but without any understanding. Today, one generation later, the audience has quite well adapted to this exotic paradise without demanding any specific meaning. In this situation, a helpful invention had been made: supertitles. I myself was the first to introduce them in the German-speaking countries. I did so with a bad conscience, reasoning that a crutch is better than no leg at all, in order to help the audience at least to a general understanding what the whole thing is all about. But whenever one looks up to the supertitle, the breath tension between performer and spectator is broken, through which the actual theatrical communion, the transfer of the performer's soul, takes place. To interrupt that is the ultimate deadly sin of theater. It is clear, when the audience does not understand and consequently cannot control whether proceedings on stage are credible and in unison with the music, whether they are truthful or lies, in one word, whether it makes sense or not, then the doors are left wide open to dilettantes and charlatans. They didn't have to be told twice. The golden honeypot of opera subsidies attracted them in droves. Under their hands, opera became a game without rules. Anything goes. If somebody, for instance, announces loudly that he doesn't know anything about opera, that he can't read a note of music, that he is in fact unmusical and anyway doesn't like music, then he has a good chance to find one or more opera managers, in Germany intendants, declaring him a man of groundbreaking, thought-provoking new ideas and urging him to direct an opera. It is this kind of absurdity that creates the often lamented discrepancy between the opera business and the works of opera that are at their best true miracles of humankind, and as such deserve to be on the UNESCO list of World Heritage. All these relatively new developments have to be seen in combination with opera's first and last perennial problem. It is expensive. It always has been and always will be expensive. This is inherent in the art form because of the large number of people needed for its execution. And they became more and more as opera expanded, artistically and technically. Today, on average, 85% of an opera house budget are labor expenses, and there's no end in sight. At the same time, though, the audience is shrinking, which leads to less and less performances. If consequently less people visit less performances, the price per performance increases steeply, and it may not be long that the vast majority of non-opera visitors is no longer willing to pay millions in subsidies for the tiny minority of opera visitors. The common habit of paying, say, 50 euro for an opera ticket and receiving with it an invisible gift of 200 euro attached in subsidy to that single seat. This enjoyable habit might become no longer socially accepted. And indeed, are we thus not approaching again the absolutistic 18th century reign of the Archduke Karl Eugen of Württemberg, who sold his subjects to the good King George as soldiers against the American rebels in order to finance his sumptuous opera for his exclusive court society? It is clear that this cannot go on forever. So what can be done to stop opera's decline? A lot indeed. Start with education. Young opera singers, concerned in the first place about their voice, practice their vocal exercises 100,000, maybe 500,000 times before even becoming a singer. But they hardly exercise 3 times a sequence of musical movements. Not that they should become actors, but they must train their body as well to become music performers. In this respect, the curriculum has to be adapted. On the other hand, a lot has already been improved in this field of education. And the world is full of wonderful talent. These young artists are suffering under the present form of the institution of opera and the unprofessional demands on stage. They, the young ones, definitely are not the problem. The actual difficulty to change the institution begins at opera's gate, because opera refuses to learn. Throughout its history, there have been wonderful islands on which music theater bloomed, and things were found that never should have been abandoned. Gluck, Mozart, Verdi, Wagner, Mahler in Vienna, Felsenstein in Berlin created such islands. But each time, the vast ocean of dilettantism swept them away, and afterwards everything was again as before. Once more, the curse of opera is it refuses to learn, except maybe it must. Necessity will force the opera business to reorganize itself if it wants to survive. Its economic basis is as untenable as the production methods are outdated. A multitude of changes should and could be done. I can only hint at some. Productions not only for the theater, but at the same time for all modern media. Division of performance from production, because both inhibit each other and cause long, unproductive hours of technical work on stage with most expensive crews. Production centers, as they exist in some places, can solve this problem. Their facilities should be equipped as film and audio studios, so a new production can be filmed under proper media conditions, instead of just having some cameras with insufficient light set up during a performance, which nearly always leads to dissatisfying results. If all this becomes too expensive, the financing entities, mostly communities, regions, or states, can merge their institutes, as has successfully been the case in several places. Concerning new works, if only of the roughly 100 operas in Germany, opera houses in Germany, if they only would cooperate and use 1 free day a week to stream a new work from one house to all the others, it could give new works a much wider platform of recognition. And that is what new works need. Opera managers also should proactively develop better solutions based on their expert knowledge in these and many other fields, and offer them up to politics. Politicians will be grateful for this expertise, because opera planning is very complicated, a bit like atomic physics. Everybody accepts, though, that only atomic physicists can judge their matter, while with opera, everybody considers himself an expert, pronouncing his opinion publicly, making the subject more complicated for responsible politicians. In short, the aim of everybody involved should be better economics for better art. These suggestions, though, concern only the means. The artistic ends have to be clearly, intelligently, understandably formulated if opera wants to further be taken seriously. The condition to do so is mastering the music and the musical stagecraft, presenting old works as an intelligent contemporary rejuvenation without ignoring their inner structure and human content. The same is true for the creation of new works, which should be composed not only for insiders, media, and specialists, but above all to be understandable for an audience at large. The abolition of anything historical, which often seems to be obligatory, is ridiculous. History consists of stories. How can the theater enact them credibly if they are deprived of their characteristic social, economic, and atmospheric environment? Likewise, the fear of artistic conventions is unnecessary. Nietzsche said it best: conventions, far from being an obstacle to great art, are the condition for great art. For only at a convention the dialectic of rule and rule breaking can play out, which is the driving force of nearly all artistic innovations, and usually comes along with a great talent. Just imagine a football game without any rules. It would be deadly boring and meaningless. This, though, is the case in many an opera performance. The works are treated as a game without rule. In view of the large amounts of public subsidies, the question might arise, isn't there, under protection of the freedom of art, which in Germany is incorporated in the Constitution, isn't there a great abuse of this very freedom of art taking place? The question is, in light of its consequences, delicate and difficult to answer. It turns out that not the opera works are the problem, but the institution of opera. And that is nothing new. All great composers suffered from it. Already Monteverdi complained in his letters about the mindless treatment of his works. Gluck's volcanic outbreaks of rage were legendary in Vienna as well in Paris. Mozart's furious letter to the Hofrat Klein in Mannheim about the state of opera in Vienna is modest compared to Wagner's lifelong battle against the dragon of the opera conditions of his time. And Verdi, at the age of nearly 80, he wrote to his publisher Giulio Ricordi, "For my part, I declare that no one has ever, succeeded in achieving all the effects I have composed in my scores. No one, never, ever, neither singers nor conductors. Never, ever, ever, 5 exclamation marks. Thus, at the end of their lifelong struggles, all these great composers had to face the bitter realization that under even the best of circumstances, and despite all their efforts, opera the depiction of the world through music can only approximate the beautiful ideal embodied in their works. Must then Verdi's condemnation be the final word on the matter? No. All the suffering on account of the inadequacies of the institution of opera are balanced out by what actually makes opera unique, irresistible, and, I believe, viable for the future. Because by its muse of music, it has the ability to do something that no other art form can do: simultaneity in space and time. Every other art form must choose one partial aspect of the world. A picture is always a cutout. A film is a sequence of images which the camera always must choose from the whole. A sculpture can be viewed from all sides, but not all at once. One has to turn it or move around it in order to see it from another angle. A novel with the most rapid mental leaps or associations requires a chronological sequence. They all cannot overcome the limitations of time and space. Music alone is different, and especially opera, because of its concreteness. Take a simple canon for two voices. Frère Jacques, dormez-vous. One hears the first voice and the second, each one on its own, but yet simultaneously together. A third, fourth, and even a fifth voice can be added to form an opera ensemble. And yet, still hears each individual voice and all of them together. Furthermore, a comment can be heard from the orchestra. The first voice is lying, and the third one knows it. And the consequences of that lie can be linked to the past and to the future by introducing a leitmotif. And if all this were not enough, one can make God's perspective audible as he looks down on his creatures, thus combining the objective perspective from the outside with the subjective individual view of each character. Everything always individually and simultaneously in space and time. I know of no other art that can offer such a complete, multidimensional image of the world. The other arts surely must envy opera for this ability. This multidimensionality might even link opera to the most advanced scientific perception of the world, which posits a multidimensional universe, possibly even a multiverse. On a small scale, opera can also do something like that and practices it every day. Let us return, though, from multi and universe to our Earth. Here it can be concluded, in view of the wonderful possibility of representing the world multidimensionally through music, the opera business should take better care of the opera works. Then opera may have a bright future. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Your words brought us a lot of hope. And this is the important message of your wonderful lecture. Thank you so much. I would like now Ioannis to present the next, and I would suggest just to wait until the very end, when it's possible to comment, to ask, and to become in a resonance of your words. Thank you very much. Ioannis, please.
Thank you, Violeta. Thank you, Professor Hampe, for the interesting presentation. And indeed, the provocative question, has the opera a future? I hope that at the end, in the question time, we shall have some interesting discussion. Now I have the honor to invite Professor ERNST PÖPPEL, Professor Emeritus, Ludwig Maximilian University, Munich, Germany, guest professor in Beijing University, China, director of the Center of Art and Science, Parmenides Foundation, I like Parmenides, you know, Germany, and member of our class 4. Professor PÖPPEL, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Sehr geehrter Herr Ehrenpräsident, Herr Präsident, I have to activate now my Zoom presentation. I wonder how this works. Whether
share screen.
I share the screen. Can you see my screen? No?
Not yet.
Oh God. So this will take a little, I'm sorry.
The green and the bottom bar, there is a share screen, and then you press your PPT.
Yeah, you are right. I knew that I was doing something wrong.
Yes, something is working. Now we see your screen. You have to open your PowerPoint.
Yeah. I've practiced this before and it doesn't work. I try. Okay.
That's man, take it easy. Oh. Now.
Share screen. Share. This is strange. Doesn't work. I have to excuse myself. I have to start again. And there's something fundamentally wrong here.
Do you have your PowerPoint?
I can hear you.
Your
Don't know
screen?
what is going on here.
Can you see your PowerPoint on your screen? Yes.
Can you see it now?
Yes, you can put it in the blow up, you know, the PowerPoint.
Can you see now?
Yes. Yes. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
So after this the beginning of rather limited intelligence and internet incompetence, I have been asked to say a few words about brain scientists and how to contribute perhaps to the visual art, poetry, and music. And I have added here, perhaps. So there's one fundamental difference between our talks, because I'm showing pictures, and that is a try to. So let's begin with visual perception. And I show here a picture by Casimir Malevich. And the question is, why do I show this here? Well, it is an icon. And if we ask ourselves, what do we actually have represented on the human retina in the eye? And it turns out it is actually only surfaces with different brightness or different color and edges. nothing more. That's on our retina. And in a certain sense, Malevich anticipated something that was then much later, 100 years later, recognized by this gentleman on the left. This is Professor Chen Lin, who has from the Chinese Academy of Sciences. He has developed a theory of visual perception that indicates that the first thing we have to process, we are processing, are topological invariants, surfaces and edges. Actually, this is for the president, Professor Meinzer, being a mathematician. He follows the Klein-Erlangen project in geometry. The lady on the right side is Professor Jan Bau, and I work together with her since about some 20 years, also on the field of neuroaesthetics. We are publishing right now a series of publications on this field, linking actually aesthetics in a very general sense, arts, with the sciences, basically brain science, psychology, but also physics. Well, let's do an experiment. As a scientist, we often do experiments in our field. So please fixate the black dot on the left within the square, the red square, for about 10 seconds. Don't move your eyes. And now move your eyes from that point down to the right lower corner, the lower edge. And what you probably will see is some kind of reddish center there. So you have an induction of color, which is not the complementary color, but the same color from the frame. Let's do another experiment here. Look at the blue field, again for 10 seconds or so. And then if you move your eyes down again, then you see probably a bluish area in the center. So we induce a color. We can do a further experiment, but sparing time will not do that. What we see here is actually some phenomenon that has been used in the op art, and it can be easily explained, or not so easy perhaps, with the structure of the retina. The retina itself is a part of the brain with 5 different kind of nerve cells, and there's a layer within which we have lateral inhibition between neighboring units within a spectral domain, different parts of the spectrum, 450, 550, 680 nanometer. I mentioned this here not to communicate that everybody now understands, coming from different fields, what I'm talking about, but the punchline of our working together or being related to art is that we are using art, visual art, music, and poetry as stimulus material, so we get a better insight into the brain machinery. But on the other hand, I think we can perhaps contribute a little bit to a better understanding what goes on, or create an additional perspective for the interpretation or understanding of art. Another example is this is a very famous example in psychology and perception. And again, let's do an experiment. Fixate in the center here at the little dot. And when you fixate there and you shift your attention to the crosses, then you see that they are in a shadow. Now move your eyes to the white dot in the center. Then you see an after image. And when, let's do the same again, fixate here for about 10 seconds. Now move over to the right again and tilt your head a little bit. And then you see the after image, which is shifting in the direction of your head. So what we see at the same time, we see an image, an after image imprinted on the retina and the construction, abstract construction of the grid here. So we dissociate perception from sensation. This aspect, this phenomenon, for instance, has been picked up, I believe, for instance, by Vasarely. This famous picture actually uses visual processes. I don't know whether Vasarely actually studied visual perception, but it uses phenomena which we study in our research. Now, when coming from Munich, I have to show, of course, this picture here. This is sort of a brain view, and it indicates that different areas of the brain represent different functions. This has been developed by Corbini and Brodmann, and this picture you can find in every textbook of psychology on brain science. And so this is just the background here. What happens in this brain is a diagram of, let's say, information processing in any kind of brains that have been developed in evolution over the last, let's say, 700, 800 million years. Now, I show this for a very simple reason, and this will be said in a minute. All brains are characterized by a very different kind of receptors. So here, visual perception, auditory perception. We just heard by Professor Hampe in the opera, the different senses, of course, are stimulated. But they have different transduction times. So the arrival time of visual and auditory information is always very different. So these are some technical problems we brain scientists have to deal with. Then there are motor neurons, cells that produce the output so that we can speak, and well, the regulation of the internal organs is manipulated from there. But then comes the great intermediate net, and here we should know three things. And if we have, and when we have understood this picture, I promise you that you understand more about brains and information processing brains than the average, let's say, medical doctor in our university in Munich. So three things we should know. Every nerve cell, and we have more than 100 billion, and the nerve cell is characterized here by a circle. Every nerve cell sends information to about 10,000 other nerve cells. This is the principle of divergence. Every nerve cell receives information from 10,000 other nerve cells. So a little computation, if all the inputs to one nerve cell is independent of each other, then we have 2 to the 10,000 or 10 to the 3,000 possible states of a nerve cell. In other words, it's incomputable. The condition of a nerve cell cannot in principle be computed. So it's a principle, this is a divergence, and convergence represents the architecture. Nerve cells talk with each other by excitation and inhibition, shown here. So one nerve cell is active, the other one will be inhibited. One nerve cell is active, the other will be excited. Now, number three, and this is why I already want to show this picture, is what is the maximal distance between any nerve cell in the brain? So when one nerve cell is active, how much nerve cells in between have to be activated or inhibited that this information comes there? And the answer is, it is simply only 4 steps in between that information comes from one point to another. Well, as a nerve, the brain is a basis for perception and memory and emotion and all that. That means there's this high interconnectivity, makes it in principle impossible that any kind of subjective phenomenon is independent of each other. There's no perception that can be free from an emotional evaluation. There's no memory which doesn't have a perceptual component. Any action is embedded also in memory functions and emotional evaluations. The language, by the way, our inheritance of Parmenides and Plato, misguides us a little bit here. So we should realize that this high interconnectivity is somehow, makes everything dependent of each other, and we cannot be transparent. We cannot, by definition, I would say, cannot understand each other. Well, how do nerve cells interact? Well, I just said it. Actually, for the interconnectivity or how they are related to each other, the Nobel Prize was given to Ramón y Cajal in 1906, one of the leading Spanish scientists at that time, or of the last century, I would say. So every nerve cell is actually independent of each other. And here comes the great riddle. So mainly what I'm saying here this evening, how little we know. Although we have 100 billion or more than 100 billion nerve cells, how is it possible that we have a unity of consciousness, that we have the feeling of nowness? So how is this connected? Well, artists have taken this up, and I show here a picture. This is by Jackson Pollock, a very famous picture, by the way. And so he somehow simulates, in a certain sense, nerve cells. But with a big difference here, the sort of nerve cells in this picture are connected with each other. That does not correspond to reality. Now, what is very interesting, pictures like this, like an action picture by Jackson Pollock, cannot be copied. Copy is impossible. That means, how is it possible actually to make copies? Well, we don't know. Now, we have some kind of dogma in our science, which is the Cartesian concept, going back, meaning that stimuli represent the world. This is R. Stimuli allow reflections. Stimuli give reaction, make a reaction. So this is the bottom-up machinery, the reproduction, representation, or reaction or function of the stimulus. However, this is actually, that's wrong here. There's a second. This is maybe misleading. If you look here at this figure, everybody probably will see a rectangle in the center, which is not present. And so it's constructed by the surrounding. If somebody does not see a rectangle here, I would be highly appreciate if he or she would contact me, because we are looking for people who have unusual phenomena so that we can study them in detail. Our research in neuropsychology is strongly based on observing unique cases. Okay, this was used in order to show the next figure. Every representation or reflection about the world is based on a hypothesis, H in the center. So the stimuli which we select, this is why the arrow shows in two directions. We need input, but the input is interpreted. So we have a top-down machinery. I come to the next poem. This is a search for order. We cannot see the impossible. What you see here is physically not possible. And this phenomenon, of course, is well known in the artwork of Escher. If you want to go through this building, it is really impossible. This is nothing new. This goes back already to Peter Bruegel the Elder. Here, the famous picture, the Magpie on the Gallows, or the dance under the gallows. So what is, so we are forced to impose some structure here. But please note also the central perspective of the picture, which is a big invention of modern times in painting. But let's compare this with this picture by Wu Li, by a Chinese artist, which has a floating view. And this is quite interesting in our research we are doing together with Chinese colleagues. Is it different of the central perspective, which we have in the West, related to Leonardo, who was mentioned before, and this Eastern perspective. So floating view is physically impossible. That somehow indicates that the way to perceiving the world and the world of art might be different. By the way, the central perspective we have is unfortunately geometrically correct, but perceptually incorrect, because at close distance, we see things differently compared to large distance. Now let's have a look at how the world is represented in the brain. Everything is the two eyes, of course, here are connected, of course, to the brain hemispheres. And what is on the right side in the visual field is indicated, the red here goes to the left hemisphere. Everything that is on the left side, blue indicated here, goes to the right hemisphere. This is true for both eyes, often by medical students in our faculty, not understood. So this phenomenon, left visual field goes to the right and left, and right goes to the left, is nicely reflected also in the arts. We have looked around and pictures that show an intense emotional balance. And it turns out that the high majority of pictures show the optical center on the left side, like in this picture here by Goya, corresponding to the representation in the right hemisphere. So the right hemisphere in the brain happens to have a stronger link to emotional evaluation, where the left hemisphere has some kind of, let's say, more analytical processing. But this is just one example. Let me give a few examples. This famous picture by Edouard Manet, Exécution du Maximilien. Another picture by Edouard Manet. Also, pictures with high emotional valence have a tendency that the optical center is more on the left. Another picture by Goya, El sueño de la razón produce monstruos. Or here, this famous picture by Albrecht Dürer, Die Beweinung Christi, in the Alte Pinakothek in Munich. And here, somehow, this picture by Dali takes together brain processing in a very artistic, nice way. So on the left side, you see Narziss on the right, and this goes as a Gestalt to the right hemisphere. Under the right side, it goes, there are the components being represented analytically in a certain sense in the left hemisphere. Okay, so when one talks about visual art, Mona Lisa is of course important. And it's interesting what we have analyzed and studied. What is sort of which part of the face is shown more often in pictures starting, let's say, after the Renaissance. Well, here you see Mona Lisa, she shows the left face. And a nice example of left face's preference compared to right face preference are self-portraits from Rembrandt. I think he has painted self-portraits over 40 years. And a high majority shows that he, looking in the mirror, shows the left face on the left when you go through this year, through his ages. There's, by the way, a question to the audience. In the mirror, left and right is reversed, but not up and down. Why is that? Maybe we can discuss this later. Okay, this was wrong. Yeah, this is a short report from a study done in China with Chinese students, 400 years later after the work of Rembrandt. And students were simply asked, what is the original? And when the original was shown left side down here, original left perspective, there was a higher probability to recognize the original compared to when this was reversed, mirror reversed, or when the original was right face in front or mirror reversed. Apparently, there are some signals, presumably in the eye region, that allow it that students 400 years later from a completely different culture have some kind of implicit knowledge about what the original is. This is for us an astounding phenomenon. Still, of course, it has still to be analyzed further. Now I come to the second part, from space to time. So there's something like a 3-second time window in visual art, poetry, and music. So when you look at this face here, this picture, you see either a skull or a lady in the mirror. And if you can see both, you no longer can see only one. It automatically after a few seconds switches back and forth. This has been analytically studied with the so-called Necker cube. Necker was an astronomer of the 19th century. And what you see, either the square 1, 2, 3, 4 is in front, or automatically switches over to 5, 6, 7, 8 is in front. So the switching back and forth happens approximately on average every 3 seconds. Now here I show a figure which you can see in at least 7 different ways. So a double Necker cube, and it never can create actually stability, visual stability. This has been picked up by Cubism. Professor Meinzer referred to Cubism already. Feininger, Paul Klee, Braque, Picasso used actually these ambiguous figures in order to create many pictures in one. So this picture here by Paul Klee is of course physically one picture, but if one looks at it, it creates some kind of internal dynamic. So there's no longer, it has actually many more pictures in one because of the temporal dynamics of our perceptual system. Well, this was an example of 3-second time window, as we call it in visual art, but it's very prominent in language. As we have studied, let's say about at least a dozen more phenomena that indicate that there is a time window of some 3 seconds also in spontaneous speech. But it's very nicely seen in Shakespeare, for instance, or in poetry in general. When you look at your watch, and I cite this now, then you will see that every line has a duration of approximately 3 seconds. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds to shake the darling buds of May, and summer's leaf hath all too short a date, and so on. Another example von Goethe. Ihr naht euch wieder schwankende Gestalten, die früh sich einst dem trüben Blick gezeigt. Versuche ich wohl, euch diesmal festzuhalten. Fühle ich mein Herz noch jenem Wahn geneigt? Ihr drängt euch zu, nun gut, so mögt ihr walten, wie aus Dunst und Nebel um mich steigt. Mein Busen fühlt sich jugendlich erschüttert vom Zauberhauch der Entzug umwittert. So, another example, what do I have here? Yeah, Lorca, for instance. No te conoce el toro ni la higuera, ni caballos, ni hormigas de tu casa. No te conoce el niño ni la tarde, porque tú has muerto para siempre. Or an example in French, this famous poem by Verlaine, which I always use in explaining also depression. C'est the last 4 lines. C'est bien la pire peine de ne savoir pourquoi. Sans amour et sans haine, mon cœur a tant de peine. You automatically speak a little slower when there are less lines less syllables in one line. Last example from poetry, this very famous poem by Schiller, eine. Before I get a negative comment about the 3-second time window, one just listen to the lines here. Auch das Schöne muss sterben, das Menschen und Götter bezwinget. Nicht die eherne Brust berührt es des stygischen Zeus. Einmal nur erweichte die Liebe den Schattenbeherrscher und an der Schwelle nach Strenge rief zurück sein Geschenk. So here we have the caesura within one line, which is sort of true for the hexameter and the Alexandrina. We have studied again this, in this case with Chinese students, what is actually the aesthetic evaluation of poems, and what we have done, we manipulated the duration of a line. So here we have Chinese students, and here on the x-axis, abscissa, we have duration of verse. And what you see here for the Chinese students, when they were listening to Chinese poems, then they have a higher aesthetic preference for the duration of 3 seconds of the line compared to when it's too slow or too fast. We even took, well, I was not participating in this report here. This is by Zhao Chen, Zhang Dongche, and Bao Yan. And so even German students, although they do not understand the language, have some, let's say, well, preference, at least in this case, around 2 seconds, as is shorter than 3 seconds. But the aesthetic value for longer and shorter is going down. So apparently there's something in the prosody of the language that modulates the aesthetic evaluation. Well, I come to the end. Richard Wagner once said, one has understood a piece of music if one has understood its tempo. Yeah, but how do I know what the tempo is? Yeah, and so here, I'm not going to sing this. Professor Hampe in the beginning referred actually to the famous motive in the Fifth Symphony of Beethoven, but he actually did not sing the fermata. So when you listen to that, it's usually it lasts for 3 seconds. This year, when you listen to this, well, it is approximately 3 seconds, but we did some experiments with that. We manipulated the duration, and we were recording brain activity with functional magnetic resonance imaging. So what you see here, the 3 second tempo, we have a high activation on both sides of the brain in the auditory region where sounds are processed. If it's too fast, the activation is low. If it's too slow, activation is lower. So maybe there's even an indicator of aesthetic evaluation linked to this phenomenon, this time window, which is a pre-semantic logistic function of the brain. So this time window of 3 seconds, which we see in visual perception, in audition, in music, in many other things, in motor movement control, in sensory communication, in communication. This is implemented for information processing, not by information processing. So the examples from the art are for us sort of empirical data, which we can somehow show in cultural artifacts. It's something which is very basic, which is important in processing in the brain, even is reflected also in the arts. Well, one can do even this year with Andy Warhol. If you look at this Campbell soup picture, if you fix somewhere, you cannot suppress to look after 2-3 seconds to another place to see where there might be something new. So we cannot believe it's always the same. So we can look, even with this Warhol picture, into the temporal machinery of the brain. Well, let's stop then with Pablo Picasso. Picasso once said, which by the way, I always say also to my students, a manuscript is never finished, a book is never finished. Picasso said, a picture is never finished. One just has to make a decision at one point, finished. A talk is never finished. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Pöppel, for the very interesting presentation and very well shown, with simple examples, I suppose, and everybody, it was well received, I could say. So let us go to the discussion session, and may I ask Violeta to ask any questions about the first speaker, please.
Thank you very much, Ioannis. Thank you very much, Mr. Pöppel. It was again a second brilliant lecture tonight. I would like to invite you to make questions. I have myself a question. If you believe that artists in general have intuitions, because you demonstrated in a very incredible way that what artists are doing is in a very strong correspondence with a scientific way of understanding the function of our brain. And so I would like to ask you if you thought about this strange intuition power of artists of all the centuries.
Was this question to me?
It's a question of both of you, because Mr. Hampe also demonstrated us this incredible function of the dimensionality in general of music, and the unique power of music, the unique power in sense of magic elements. And now, after so many hundreds of years, we're thinking about Monteverdi was the beginner of the operas. And so we know exactly the century of the birth of the opera. So in fact, it is a splendid example of this multi-dimensionality that you are in 20th century, 21st century demonstrating from this with some scientific scientific solutions. I don't know, you understand?
Yeah.
Researches.
Well,
So
for me, this is actually a very simple thing. Humans have only one brain, right? So artists and politicians and scientists have a brain, and do their thing. And so when we I would say, for instance, an experiment, a good experiment is like a piece of art. And an artist who writes or composes, of course, he necessarily has to use the machinery of the brain, and all the interconnectivity. The one point I wanted to make is you cannot get free of your emotional evaluation, so it's impossible. This is an illusion, of course, in the Cartesian philosophy that we can go completely free in the rationalistic tradition of any emotional evaluation. This is, of course, not correct. So I think we are very close, actually, in the creative process, both the artists and the scientists. The scientists are not at all, well, there may be some who have the illusion that everything under control and understand everything and follow only explicit knowledge and rationalistic thought. That's not true. I think an insight, presumably in the arts as well, you suddenly have an insight, you go a certain direction. And I think this is a very similar in artists and scientists and any other person.
Yeah, in fact, not everybody is creating such incredible thing. Not everybody is a genius. On the other hand, we are feeling the power of these things. But how do you explain? Maybe you can explain the dimension of a genius, because it's a very the strong correspondence. It's very evident between art and science, and this from this point of view.
Well, while Professor Hampe is still trying to unmute himself, okay, please go ahead.
Ich habe sehr oft, weil es in Englisch halt das beste Wort ist, das Wort understanding benutzt. Damit war keineswegs ein intellektuelles Verstehen, ein rationales Verstehen auch gemeint. Wagner spricht oft vom Gefühlsverständnis, an das sich besonders die Musik und jede Kunst richtet. Und das ist natürlich auch hier der Fall bei allem, was ich gesagt habe. Eines noch, eine der großen Schwierigkeiten in meinem Beruf als Regisseur ist, Musik kann viele Dinge gleichzeitig tun, oft sogar so viel, dass Sie als Regisseur auswählen müssen, welches Thema Sie jetzt inszenieren, wenn zum Beispiel 3 Themen übereinander komponiert sind. Der Körper, mit dem wir auf der Bühne arbeiten und das Ausdrucksmittel der Seele ist, wenn ich es pathetisch sagen darf, der kann aber nur eine Sache machen. Zu einer Zeit. Er kann nach links oder nach rechts schauen, aber nicht beides gleichzeitig. Und aus dieser Diskrepanz zwischen der körperlichen Darstellung auf der Bühne von Musik, der Körper kann nur eine Sache zu einer Zeit machen, er kann sehr schnell hin und her oszillieren, zwischen Furcht und Mut oder was immer. Und die Musik kann sehr viele Sachen zu gleicher Zeit machen. Und das ist ein ziemliches Problem, wenn man mal damit angefangen hat. Ich wollte nur darauf hinweisen.
Yeah, I think the one question you were raising, I say Violeta, yeah, is how.
Sorry, I spoke in German now.
So I think humans are driven by curiosity. I think this everybody, maybe we are untrained to be curious in schools and universities, but I think a child, and then we're getting older, we are driven by curiosity. And then we do something in science or art. Let's use these two examples. And if you have achieved something, if you have understood something, as Professor HAMPE just said, then you have you have a reward. You have some kind of like an Erlösung. So you feel free, and you're just happy, yeah. And to find this situation, I think this is the driving of scientists and artists, to get this kind of understanding. May I use the opportunity to ask Professor HAMPE something? You said quite rightly so that of course the opera includes everything, yeah. It brings space and time together. Actually, you have to be in the opera house to really experience this, the vision and audition and all that. Yeah. It just so happens, I think, that there are other human activities where we also use all our senses. And so I do not think that actually this can be mimicked in television or somewhere. And it's actually mimicked in a Catholic religious service. Yeah. And in the church, you have that also. In fact, you have it when you eat, when you celebrate eating, yeah, all the senses are also stimulated, and this has another kind of satisfaction. And indeed, it actually real love is characterized exactly by this also, that all the senses in this moment are sort of activated and satisfied. So there are other human activities. So the art of loving, eating, and well, religion also. I just wanted to add this perhaps, and I don't know whether you agree to expand to this, well, expansion of your argument.
Yeah. Any other question?
I have a question.
Perhaps a comment. Thank you very much for your inspiring talks, but I think the last point will be essential, perhaps for the whole series of your lectures, namely what can be called the embodiment. That means the engagement of all senses, it was said in the last remarks. And I think that demonstrates that purely rule-based representation is not sufficient to understand what is going on in nature. Rule-based knowledge may be sufficient in logics, perhaps in mathematics, things like that. But here, what we call embodiment. And last remark in that direction, I especially interested in robotics, and things are going on in AI. And there we are confronted nowadays exactly with that problem, that this kind of embodiment, which you both described in opera, in theater, and even in music, cannot be grasped by rule-based robots and computer programs. And that, I think, is absolutely amazing. And perhaps we should think about that more and approach to the secret, which is perhaps behind it during the following lectures.
I have two.
Yes. Yes, Professor HAMPE. Yes.
I have two questions to that. First, to Professor Meinzer, do you believe that any developed artificial intelligence will be able to cry about modulation from A major to D minor.
Mhm.
As it happens to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will not speculate about the future. Maybe in any science fiction movie there are already simulated things like that, but that is science fiction. But speaking now from what is going on in these disciplines, I see no possibility to do that. Yeah. But I'm cautious. In the past, there were several people who made claims in that direction, like my claim now, and then they were rejected some years later. So I'm cautious. But actually, I do not see the basis for this kind of realization.
Well, Meinzer, there's another problem with robots, I think, or AI or machine intelligence is the necessity you have to create an external point of view towards yourself. We call it theory of mind, yeah. And I do not see any indication of that, I must say.
Yeah.
What we are seeing with the implicit knowledge, I was talking about implicit knowledge, yeah. I think there's at present no bridge at all. There's, I think, simply the illusion of control by some people at MIT or Carnegie Mellon or something.
Yeah, there are some steps nowadays concerning self-awareness of robots. That until several degrees that is already possible, but your claim or your request is more what we call self-consciousness or things like that. And actually that is far away from any kind of realization. Nevertheless, we have experiments nowadays with, you know that, with computer programs and with robots to simulate painting or even music. And there are some interesting examples of compositions which were made by computer programs. But the point is, and that means embodiment. What you both underlined in your last remarks, naming feeling is involved. Yeah, you can have a nice mathematical structure, but the people are not touched by it, and that is absolutely amazing for me. How is that realized? Maybe that we learn more about that in brain research in the future. But I think these are essential points concerning arts. The emotional and sensitive touching of people. How is that possible? And I do not know any example to realize that by computer programs or robots.
Thank you very much. Oh, Mr. Hampe again, okay?
Und meine zweite Frage, und es ist eine wirkliche Frage, wo ich eigentlich keine vorbequaste Meinung habe an Professor Pöppel, aber ich benutze einfach die Gelegenheit. Wir stellen immer wieder auf der Bühne, bei Proben und auch in Aufführungen selbstverständlich fest, Gefühle entstehen. Man hat mir mal gesagt, wir haben eine Art zweites Hirn, das viel ältere Gastroentero-Gehirn, dass beide Gehirne aber nur durch relativ wenige Nervenbahnen verbunden sind. Ich mache immer wieder bei Sängern, Schauspielern, bei mir selber die Erfahrung, Gefühle entstehen im Gastroentero. Ich nenne es jetzt mal Gehirn. Ich weiß nicht, ob das richtig ist. Und steigen von da auf zur Bewusstheit. Also die Sprachen sagen es ja. The languages say it. I act from my guts. Or in German, ich spür's im Urin. So, Mozart, who was a great physiologist also, and maybe one of your students could could go into that. When Donna Anna and Don Giovanni recognizes Don Giovanni, who gave her a hand kiss and then says addio amici, goes off, and then Mozart composes deep in the bass. Da, da, dee, da, bum, ba-dum, ba-dum, ba-dum. He composes the rising of the slow feeling, and then the recognition of Don Giovanni explodes in her brain. Is that about right? It's a question I'm not sure about it.
Yeah, I think a problem we have in our science, or we had it at least for a long time, is to treat the brain as an independent entity that is somehow not really connected with all the other parts of the body. Yeah. Of course, I think we have to, as Klaus Meinzer just said, of course, it's a system where everything is connected with everything. Take the skin. The skin is also an expression, our emotional involvement. So there's every part of the body, and of course also the guts, but this does not mean that there's an independent entity in the guts, that tells the forebrain, okay.
No, I didn't mean that.
So I think what you're pointing is that we have to look at the human body as a unity. Everything is interconnected densely. Yeah. Like I said, also in the brain itself, information transmission is also very, very intense. So I think we are in the illusion to separate all that. And I think this was also in the beginning discussed. I mentioned that we have this the tendency to abstract different areas of competence. The separation of art and science is actually a rather new invention. It is, and so what happens right now in the sciences, or take the medicine. I come from the medical faculty. The different fields, professors in different areas. There's a health chirurg is sitting there also. They are well. A surgeon cannot talk to an internal medicine. Psychiatry is a completely different thing also. So there's nothing more trivial than listening to conversations between professors of a medical faculty coming from different fields. So we are separating all, and so our task actually at the university, and hopefully also at the academy here, is to bring the things together, to walk the bridges, to find where what we can share. Of course, we have to be specialists at the same time, but at the same time, we have to look for anthropological universals that share also the different cultures. So we have cultural specifics, of course, the languages we speak, but then we have these anthropological universals. And what I was trying to say with my examples, only superficially, of course, that there are temporal and spatial universals that share all humans, and so that we can communicate with the Russians and Hopi and Chinese and whatever on the same way. And this time window, just to repeat this again, the 3-second time window makes it possible that we share it's a musical experience, that we cannot communicate actually. So that I do not have to finish actually a sentence, because you are going to know what I'm going to say right now. So we are synchronized all the time. The synchronization in such a pre-semantic, automatic time window allows communication and allows to hear music also. Great examples is, by the way, the Kunst der Fuge. When you listen to a fugue, is a wonderful extra experiment which we actually are doing, that you switch back and forth in certain lines, and this is not a random process. I think Bach was really a fantastic scientist, giving us material to do brain research. Well, I should stop talking. I'm sorry. They're getting carried away right now.
Okay, that's very interesting discussion.
Thank you very much.
And I would like to say something for both of these presentations, that I could see in the discussion really emerges a bridge between this art and from science presentations. One perspective it would be that the scientific analysis of brain and theories of mind embodied, in what we call, human body, human organism. All these are a closed system or an open system. This is very important, the crucial question, in order to answer various, questions rising about perception, intuition, multidimensional things, etc. So let us first define this question. I mean, the human body is a closed system with respect to the environment, and I mean not only the nearby environment, but the faraway as well environment, or an open system. How do you think? How do you consider this?
Well, closed systems exist only in theoretical physics, maybe in thermodynamics. To make an argument, every cell, every body is an open system. I think this is and bidirectionally open, inside out and outside in. Yeah.
Exactly. So all the body is an open system.
Yes. Yes.
So we should not concentrate and focus on the body and the senses, 5 senses, but we should take into account other dimensions which are beyond us.
Yeah, I do not know how you mean this now, but of course, yeah, open system means that
in the way of thinking. In the way of thinking, while thinking, what means we receive some ideas. We have a concept.
Yeah, of course. Yeah,
it means comes from inside, or from outside, or the stimulus is outside, and then the process is coming to the brain, and then we express it. What I mean, we have the, probably, Professor Pöppel, the quantum entanglement. So how this entanglement, the quantum mechanics could be applied to what we're talking now in music, in poetry, in science, in art. By the way, but from the time that we conceive something, can we take it as a limited entity within us, or we should take into account something more?
I think I can see this only as a metaphor that we are, of course, constantly disentangling. Actually, I discuss this almost every evening with my wife. She is theoretical physicist, by the way, also a member of the academy. That is actually this point here of entanglement on this micro, at the quantum level. Is this actually a metaphor, or can we use it directly to better understand, for instance, all the cognitive processes? There has been a theory by Penrose and Hameroff that actually consciousness might be on this, maybe understood on this level. This is not, I cannot follow this. It is, for me, it's very unlikely. Yeah? I think the real question, I think for I'm understanding what you're asking is, what is the transition from the quantum world to the meso world in which we live, and then actually to the relativistic world? So we are spanning actually unbelievable spaces here. And is there a direct link from quantum mechanics to what we are doing here in our discussion, for instance? And some people think, okay, yeah, sure. But could it not be also that there's maybe other people in the audience, that, yes, that different rules come to the meso level in which we are living? Yeah.
Okay, yes, I understand what you mean, but this is not a metaphor. This is not a theory. It has been proved experimentally in particle physics, the entanglement.
Yeah, no, that I know.
So it is a real effect.
Discuss that later on, I think. It's actually a deep problem, but I think it is a little bit beyond now our discussion now on science and arts.
Okay, this is a wider perspective, from the side of art and from the side of science, that one could think, beyond our what we think capacities and limitations. So it's nice to sometimes to bring in, the newer evidence from science and what some decades ago seemed to be a dream, or fantasies. Any more questions?
No, I think just to comment on that, I think for instance, in quantum mechanics, I think Costa de Beauregard has shown that time can go backwards on the quantum level. And of course, what you're saying is all true. But I think Professor Meinzer said, I think it goes perhaps beyond our
understand, yes.
Yeah.
Well, it's the level that we have to pull them back. So any more questions from the participants? We have already 37 participants.
I would have a question.
Yes, Professor
we heard about the education of the artists, but and maybe that I missed it, but I would like to know or to bring into play as well the education of the listener, of the consumer, it would be today, the division, the separation of science and arts, and then the differentiation within the sciences is the one thing. But isn't that as well something we as receptors replicate? I mentioned it with my students that they are open to cross the border from what they do usually, and they are open not least for opera, if they have the opportunity and if you allow them, if you bring it nearer to them. The same is had been true in my experience with different areas of the arts, painting and something they had not been used to, and it had not been relevant for them. I say relevant in inverted commas, but it was not part of their usual world. They had been stuck, be it in their educational field of whatever they studied, or be it in whatever had been their life world. It was kind of difficult for themselves to allow themselves, I can enter the world of opera and can enjoy it. So it's the other way as well of learning to listen, learning to enter this world. You mentioned there is something of a natural, of a genuine, yes, we like it. But we have to be exposed, to what we like. And we have to, I think we have to be exposed to, there is nothing wrong with liking it. This would be a question as well to both of you, possibly, or to all of us, to open or to mention this way of opening as important as well in terms of education. Then beginning at school age, I always loved going to the museum and seeing little kids sitting there and enjoying, really kind of natural. But we instead of bringing them, allowing them, promoting it, we tend more and more to where this is not for you, you are specialized, you have to be specialized in this and that.
I think you raise a very important point of in the educational industry. And there's a very different in different countries as well. I'm connected with the Peking University since almost 40 years now, actually. And I've seen there the education industry is rather different from ours. You know? And so you have to learn a special canon. This is actually changing now in the last 10 years or so, that suddenly there's another kind of opening up and showing more interest, and people going to other countries and enjoying what is new. But in our culture, I see that also, that the basic curiosity of kids in kindergarten and up to 10 years or so, and it's somehow then changed that you have to learn in a special curriculum, and so somehow the possibility to look across is somehow limited. So we are exploiting children, also students, by the way, coming in from the medical faculty, and not really promoting the curiosity. And let's say what you say. I go to the museum with doctoral students in medicine, like Alte Pinakothek in Munich, and explain in pictures things that art historians cannot explain. So what we observe, what we do in science, and discover new perspectives similarly, I think, well, just as an example. So I think we have a problem actually in the societies. Yeah? Or take another example, United States, that evolution theory cannot be taught independently in certain areas, that you have to teach also creationism. So there's the political frame within which education happens, and somehow, well, not learning, for instance, that we are imprinted in the world. We enter the world with genetic programs of possibilities, and then we are imprinted with certain prejudices. The language is not a prejudice, but you use it. Belief systems are prejudices. So we have to understand that in order that we are imprinted. And if you know that, we understand that we have necessarily prejudices. And in order to communicate with others, we have to know that I myself, I'm a victim. I think we should be very proud in our Western culture that in 1620, when Francis Bacon wrote his famous book, that he started the book with the 4 errors we are making in science. So we have theories, and we have used language, and we have individual prejudice, and we have prejudices. Modern science starts with pointing out, be careful not to fall into your prejudices. Coming back to that, I think would be very useful.
Good. Any more questions?
Just one comment, on the curriculum. It had been funny that one of my students complained, actually economics student, complained at some stage, why do I have to go to this arts class? This was here in China. I'm studying economics and not arts. And after 2 weeks, she said, I'm so excited, so happy that I'm allowed, well, in a way that I had been forced to do it. Forced meaning really encouraged. This is something you have to do to be, well, to develop a complete personality.
Yeah, very good example. You can share this.
Mr. Hampe, you wanted to tell us something.
Just a quick remark. Professor Hermann mentioned opera. Naturally, you cannot understand opera without any, how should I say, knowing a little bit about the culture. And in China, for instance, the problem is it is just carried out to the world. And I was lucky enough to work all over the world. I have developed programs, not for children, for grown-up audiences, just explaining some rules, what opera is all about, explaining on an example of, say, any given opera like Figaro. And Professor Meinzer, I didn't mean that great art is created by following the rules. On the contrary, usually exceptional art is created by breaking the rules. But before we can break a rule, you have to have a rule. And when you do that with audiences, my experience is, and I've done it very, very often in different countries, the audience is more than grateful to receive a help in understanding how, let's say, Mozart in Figaro expresses things by music. And they start to double enjoy that and triple enjoy that. So that's very important, especially because opera naturally, when I said shrinking, the audience is shrinking in Europe, but it at the same time it has been expanding and is expanding over the whole world. And only there you cannot just present the imitation of the bad habits of opera, but you should introduce people, especially people from another culture. I've just done the whole Wagner ring in Japan. You have to introduce them and make them understand, kapieren in German, not intellectually understand. Kapieren what the thing is all about.
Thank you very much. Ioannis, what do you think?
I think,
Please.
yes, if there isn't any comment or any question, we have to close this colloquium
close.
and to renew our gathering for 8th of October.
Yeah.
Second
So
one.
wonderful, wonderful. So we discovered in this night the correspondence between, we say, arts and science. In fact, it is a unity of our culture. And it is so incredible that we are becoming curious. I am becoming curious like little children. And I thank you so much. And Ioannis, I'm sure you are also very happy with our wonderful beginning.
Happy.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, everybody. Okay. And
Thank you.
See you next time. Good night.
Bye-bye.